Friendly faces. Hey, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Or names, at least. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, hey, everyone, I'm Andrew. I am the Executive Vice President of Strategy here at Knapsack, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Mr. Evan Lovely.
Hey everybody, I'm Evan. I'm one of the co-founders of Knapsack and running the product here. Thanks everybody for taking the time to join us. Hope you're all having a wonderful day so far.
So we're going to dig into some updates, but this is going to be a little more than just showing you some of the latest things you can click on and what happens when you do. We want to share a little bit about sort of the vision that we're working on and the journey that we're on, and tie together some things maybe some of you have used or seen in the past with some of the latest things that we're working on now, both that are in the product and some things that are upcoming, and hopefully give you a good sense of what we're really trying to do in this space and for teams working through digital production. But before we get into all that, a couple of shameless plugs. We do more of these sorts of things, events, content. We've got a webinar coming up here in just a couple of weeks with this amazing crew of friends from the industry and hosted by our own Chris Bloom from our product team, really just digging into tokens. It's a topic that never gets old because it seems there's constant change and evolution there. So head on over to knapsack.cloud/events. You can register for that as well. We'd love to see you there. Of course, we'll provide the recording to anyone who registers but can't make it. And if you're more into the in-person vibe, we've got that going on as well. We've been hosting these design system leadership summits for a little over a year now. We've recently rebranded them a bit to the Patterns Leadership Summit. We continue to do these, it looks like more than monthly. We've got our next one coming up in San Francisco just over a month from today on March 13th. A week after that, we'll be in New York City, so we'll have everyone surrounded there. And then in April, we're going to be in Chicago. We're generally trying to do New York and San Francisco every quarter or so if we can. And then some other markets like Chicago. We just did Atlanta a few weeks ago. Always looking for people to tell us where we should go next as well. So again, head on over knapsack.cloud/events, and you'll find these as well as all of our digital events and webinars as well. All right, so back to us. We're Evan and Andrew, and we're excited to show you a little bit about what we've been working on, why we've been working on it, and what we think we're all working towards over here. We're going to spend a fair amount of time in the product today, but before we do that, just want to give you kind of a little bit of context on what these features mean and what we see happening in the world of digital production tooling. So we're going to share a little bit about that vision. We will get into the new features that are really around how do we integrate and connect design and code in some new and exciting ways. How do we support really robust theming? How do we allow for prototyping and composition of experiences in our UI? And those really all fit under a theme you'll see today, which is this idea of a new creator role that's evolving in the world of tooling, in Knapsack, even in our licensing very specifically, rolling out some new user types. And so we want to tie that thread together and show you how all these different features can really work together in this somewhat new capacity. And that's also all going to hopefully pave a nice clear path that you can see how we work towards a future with more automation, more AI. Again, these are individual features, but that really tie together into a cohesive journey, hopefully. And we'll spend plenty of time on Q&A. So again, drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A in Zoom, and we'll hit them as we go. So, vision-wise, for a long time, Knapsack and a lot of design system and digital production tools have largely focused on these three audiences. Probably a little oversimplification. This is not meant to dismiss our content, copywriters or accessibility analysts, but we're generally working around design, development, and product management. And each team has sort of had their primary focus area in terms of the coded libraries, the UI kits, where you're working with brand, or just trying to get all these folks to work together. And this has really been where we focused a lot of our effort in terms of the users we support, not just on the design system team where the design and code are really being created that's going to be enabling all the producers, but also enabling these three teams to kind of see each other's work, empty everyone's pockets onto the same table, create this central source of truth around which we can work. And that's really been that focus is, Knapsack users represent cross-functional teams. We may all be thinking about different things and working on different single sources of truth, but we can bring them together in a shared platform. And that's really a lot of, what we focused on so far.
Yeah, so when you create, you want it to get used and viewed, and you want to be able to make sure that, especially as somebody who creates and crafts design systems, you want your stuff used at scale as well. And so, you know, usually a design system team serves other people at their same company who ultimately serve the end users, that come and view everything. And so, what we want to start focusing on more is really empowering those people that use design systems to serve the ultimate end user. And so, we're seeing that there's plenty of developers and designers, but there's a lot of people who don't have Figma or VS Code installed, and they want to be able to take the artfully crafted building blocks that have been made by the designers and developers and craft experiences for their end users that ultimately serve like the business needs. And so how can we be able to like empower those people with all the awesome things that the design system team have built? So that's kind of what we're trying to be able to focus on more as we go forward throughout this year, because we think that there is a lot of great building blocks and a swifter way of assembling those in something that gets out in the hands of users quite quickly and really aligns with what that original plan vision was for from the designers and the developers. And so I think that the people who build those building blocks, those designers and developers, when they see in the end users experiencing and seeing what they had envisioned, what they had built, that's what they want to be able to do. And so making sure that, yeah, it can empower these new creative roles, but also that, their work doesn't get bastardized, for lack of a better word. Right. And so we want to make sure that those wonderful, wonderful experiences that everybody spent time working on ends up going out to those end users. So that's a lot of what we're trying to be able to focus on.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that I wanted to find a way to get to, and you teed it up, which is this idea of enabling teams to create within structure. That is really something you're going to see here in a minute as we get into the product. The goal of a design system is to capture decisions and the implementations of decisions, brand decisions, product decisions, design decisions. And with the idea that if we work within those parameters, those decisions, we're going to be able to go really far, really fast for a lot of use cases that we run into fairly frequently. And yet, the way that we create a lot of experiences today, while it has that concept, right? Figma and other infinite canvas tools have libraries, it's kind of too easy to break them, right? It's too easy to go outside them. And so you use the word bastardize the well-made things, but the idea is we've created these libraries, these elements, these patterns that we want to stick within until we have a really good reason not to. And so a lot of what we're focused on is how do we match the tooling, evolve our tooling from not just, hey, we captured those decisions and implementations, but now we can work with them. I can create with those implemented decisions in a little bit of a new way, not the Figma component representation of it, not necessarily having to know how to code, build something with React or web components, but just knowing what you need to make and what your maybe product requirements are. How can the design system team enable more folks to go in and make something within those parameters, right? And also the value of that is when you can't make something or you get to a limitation, you now know exactly what you really need to work on, right? So we get this flywheel effect where things can be created faster. Teams that are spending high effort design and engineering work are doing it where it's absolutely necessary and not accidentally making new variations of the card that we didn't need to make. And so there's this real exciting future that we see evolving of how do we let teams really make with the system, regardless of who they are, and not just, build a lot of documentation about it.
Yeah. You touched upon basically something that is really beneficial about creating with what you have is gap analysis. What's missing? Okay. Like, hey, what we had, let us build most of it. That's definitely going to let you know what to build next, for sure. So I think that's an important part of creating something with the pieces that you have already.
So let's get into that a little bit and product. And so there were three things we listed on here that are relatively new and that we've been working on recently in Knapsack. And they sort of build into that story of, first we do need to capture those implemented decisions, and then we can allow teams to work with them, create with them, even sort of in the future move towards some more automation. And so first and foremost, in terms of capturing decisions. Knapsack, I mentioned, is a central source of truth for a lot of teams, meaning if I've got something like a button component, that probably exists in a Figma library. This one looks like it's in a Figma library called Sandbox Components. I've got a React implementation of our button. This looks like a web component implementation of the button. We've also got some usage guidelines. And so we have all these things that represent this institutional knowledge, really, right? This example of here's a way that we've solved for a use case. Button may be simple, you can get into higher order patterns. And what that shows up in Knapsack is, yes, we can write docs, but most importantly, I've got a window into the React component here where I can manipulate it, play with the allowable props, variations. Same thing for web components. So we've got two different implementations in code. And then we have a Figma component, which one of our latest releases last year, or near the end of last year, is rolling out a deeper Figma integration. So we're actually able to pull all this stuff in from Figma as data and as visuals in much the same way that we're pulling in design or code sources from things like NPM packages or a file path in a Git repo. And so now we're surfacing all of these things in a more powerful way where we can build comparisons and really see, hey, how does design look next to code? But even more than that, we can actually align the data, right? We can see, hey, are the properties that define the presentation and the use case within experiences that are defined in Figma, are those implemented that way in code, right? This is great for alignment, but it also is going to feed into something we'll come back around here to around automation, right? If we want to go more seamlessly between media, between different forms of web implementation, Figma file, building these bridges that allow us to say, here are the data assets we expect, here's the terminology, and here's how we can actually pass those between. That's some of the early work we're doing that's going to pay off here in the automation side here in a little bit. But really pulling these things in a sort of automated, but in a source way, right? Here's what we all are looking at in our single sources of truth. That alone, as far as we capture that institutional knowledge, becomes really powerful. But what do we do with it once we have it? So we're going to focus mostly on two areas here, which are the design area, where we've expanded support for variables, collections, and modes. All the concepts you're probably familiar with if you're defining those in Figma. We even have a Figma plugin where we can actually pull out your Figma variables, collections, and modes, get them into Knapsack. And this represents one of those elements of structure, right? We've said that a theme in this demo represents these definitions of font family, a file path to a logo, colors. And so we were saying this is a theme. If you can make a mode and you can define things that work within this structure, we can roll that out very quickly, right? We've set up kind of a contract for how we handle themes in much the same way that we have components that have certain properties and they have certain subcomponents they can use, right? There are allowable permutations. There are things you can control and there are things you cannot. If we can figure out how to allow teams to work within those parameters, those constraints, that's going to allow us to create this non-creator role. It's what we'll show you here in a moment. It's also going to allow us to play nice with some AI, which really loves structured data. So
and for anyone curious here, like what all this stuff puts out is a lot of CSS variables, right? And so pretty standard, like super standard, the standard way for sure for styling across like all the components. But being able to set up a system where you can override pieces of it downstream, it's super duper powerful on that and can really change the whole look and feel of a whole site pretty easily.
So what Evan calls out is a key point here. If you've used Knapsack for a while or you've seen our content in the past, you know that we're not just about documenting and capturing these variables, but we actually want to allow you to implement them. And so much as we always have with design tokens, where we are performing transformations that allow you to get consumable CSS and Swift and XML for Android and all the formats you actually might implement your styles in, we can provide those based on the tokens, which can be based on Figma, right? So we can start to build this connected pipeline. It's really important with theming because it ties really closely with some of our latest features around prototyping and composition. And this is really where you see this new creator role, I think, come to life. And so what we're in now is the new prototyping area of Knapsack. And if I go into, I'll start with this pre-built landing page that we've created. What you're looking at is, a functional page made of components, these components here on the right. And if I go and open up the code, you'll see the code that's powering this, where I'm pulling in a bunch of components and then everything else is essentially configuration of props within those components or passing other subcomponents in, like passing the button into the hero or into a card. And so again, all of this represents just the structure of our theme, the structure of our components, and the structure of the web medium, right? That's another important thing here, that we're working within the end user's medium. We're not working within a representation of it. Figma is in the browser, yes, but working with vector assets is different than working with HTML and CSS. And so what this enables is, first and foremost, I can go see these presentations, see how things look today, test out these different themes or modes, right? So I've got Cozy Compact that adjusts some spacing. I've got, a couple of different brands with light and dark mode, different font families, different colors. And, I can also go within these components and play with content. So let's say I want to go into my grid of cards here, and I want to go into the rightmost card and say, this needs a call to action. So I'm going to go put my primary button in. There we go. Maybe I actually need 2 buttons. So I'm going to duplicate that. This one's going to say read more. And the other one might say, let's see, let's probably make that outlined and have it say, I don't know, read less. And now I'll, those look a little silly. So now this is where I work within the realities of just the web medium. And there's things we can expect you'll be able to do, even if it's not supported in a prop today or default in the component. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, I want to lay these out vertically in that slot, and I want to give them a medium. I'm using my tokens here. I've got a medium 16 pixel spacing token. And what I just did is I added my content. I can go look at this again. If any engineers in the crowd, you'll see this. I basically wrapped that slot in a div and applied some simple styling. So really easy for any engineer.
Also,
yeah, go ahead.
Go back to that is like that's using a design token as well, so you can see the gap, right? So that's something that if the design token theme had gotten overridden or altered, it applies there. So we're using as many design tokens as possible to apply all these different stylings.
Well, a great point, because what I want to highlight is now we can connect these two concepts where we have, this Cozy Compact, and even just the variables are defined in tokens. My themes are defined here. And so I can actually start to test out a new mode or to make changes to a mode and see how that would reflect here, whether it's my medium spacing token or it's, something like a whole theme, right? And so let me save my changes here. And you can imagine how this is helpful for, everyone from a product manager to someone looking at a wireframe, planning designs, and I can't break these components. I can't add a new prop. I can't make it do something it can't already do. And so the ability to work within what we've defined and see how far we can go becomes really powerful. Even if you can't make a whole landing page, right? If you make it 80% of it, exactly the 20% we need to go work on. And so in this case, let's say, I have these themes here. I can actually add a whole new theme. And so let's go into design. I can change something if I want. Let's just start simple. If I just change one of these to pink, and I could use tokens, or in this case for the demo, just a hex code. If I go back, you'll see actually immediately that Arcadia Light theme is no longer using purple, it's using pink. So color is an obvious example. We think about things like animation timing, border radius, font family. There's so many things that we can control at that global level. And the ability to see the change in real time in this branch environment, this sort of staging environment, allows us to really test the validity of those style changes or brand changes, knowing what a user will see, right? And I can even take this and open this in a new window. Maybe I want to do some accessibility checks on this. There's all kinds of great plugins. I think we've got Axe DevTools even has some free features for doing a quick accessibility review. Awesome. 4 issues. There were 3 earlier, so I'm guessing that doesn't like my contrast ratios here or something. But this is production code. This is as close as you can get to something that's going to ship using your design system without actually having that thing teed up and built, right? And it's in the medium, it's the production components powering this. And so this idea of let someone like me with my philosophy degree and no ability to code, and you don't want me in Figma, I can make something pretty serviceable. And I even just showing you starting from scratch too, I can go in here to this in the structured canvas and start working here in a little bit more of a constrained way than dragging things onto a vector canvas. So let's say I've got my image card, just a simple example. Again, same kind of mental model, right? I'm throwing things onto a canvas and then I'm working with them. I'm going to use my layout options again. I'm going to go horizontal this time, same spacing. I can actually get really granular here where maybe I want to change the theme of one section. I can actually do that in these layout options. I can go in and say, hey, this bottom right button, let's go back to the one that was using purple, right? A lot of not always at a page level that you're applying themes, right? So this ability to work within the medium of destination of the web, work within your real components, work within your real themes, unlocks a lot, and it comes with some change, right? It may mean for a lot of teams we're doing a little bit less full comp design, even if we were using a bunch of Figma components. We're changing up that workflow, but what we're seeing is the design system doesn't need to only speed things up by 10 or 15 or 20%, right? Especially for a lot of experiences that are highly covered by the system. Why can't we make those 75% faster, 80% faster? And go work on that backlog, go work on those ideas you didn't get to ship in the last project. That's really what this is about, right? Focusing our effort where it needs to be used. Let's do one more thing. Let's go add a new Knapsack brand to this, right? Because I'm working with some customers now who sometimes it takes a year to launch a relatively simple, marketing website or experience. And there's just so much design effort that goes through that has to happen, brand creation, right? And the opportunity here for them is to say, instead of 6 months of design and feedback and rounds of review, we're going to go to the product owner with an experience in code and say, we could launch this today. Let's see what we want to change, right? And so yeah.
Well, real quick. So, we were going to be talking about kind of like also some of the things that are on our roadmap. I think that it might be good for me to just kind of jump in real quick for something around
Please.
like prototyping here. So, what we have on our roadmap is basically being able to pull in like third-party component libraries really easily in addition. So, maybe you haven't actually built a button yet, but you have card and grid. Well, being able to use like a Radix or Material UI button as, kind of almost like a placeholder. I mean, maybe it can go to production if that's what, aligns in your visual brand, that's for sure. But being able to create with like the building blocks you have, but also other building blocks just to be able to get your idea out all the way. Because again, if you remember, I was mentioning about how like one big advantage of building with your components is gap analysis. So you can kind of think about basically putting in like a third party component as almost like, hey, one of our components goes here. And hey, maybe that third party library works great enough because again, it just aligns with your visual brand. So that's something that's coming this year for us on the prototyping front.
Yeah, that's some of when we think about just the creator role in general, right? Like we're working in this new sort of in between space. And so solving for that, 20%, 30%, 40% of your experience that isn't the system, coming up with those ideas where we can say, hey, you don't have this, but how do we give you something to put in place of it, right? So that, and eventually make that feed seamlessly into project management. So, hey, we've used this process of going through this structured canvas in order to define the scope of where we need to go make things that are higher effort. And hopefully that scope becomes very exact and very clear across functions, design and code, where we can say, we're all totally aligned on exactly what we actually need to go make here, right? And if that's a new theme, go launch a new Knapsack theme with your Knapsack logo and our secondary brand color. So we're really excited about that in terms of what it does from the UI. But this is also just as important in the context of AI and automation, hashtag, and all the other important things that every product is talking about today. I keep seeing teams ask the questions that we think about, which are, hey, great that I can generate something in V0 or any video you see on X, it can make a web UI, but how do I do it with my stuff, right? With my system, right? And so that's where Knapsack has this really unique offering, and that we're pulling in your production system, making all this stuff with your artfully crafted components that are accessible and tested and performant and all those things, right? And so the ability to use the same thing you're looking at, but think of it as, what's going on under the hood, in that, even if you don't know code, you can look at this and imagine a bulleted list, right? A bunch of things that are ordered specifically on a page that have some sub information around things like the size, et cetera, et cetera. So Knapsack is built on structured data, right? There's some pretty standard schemas out there, the JSON schema that we leverage heavily as well. But this idea that we've got data that defines your different components, the parameters, the allowable, different combinations, data that defines a theme, data that backs up a rendered experience like this living, breathing static site that I'm looking at, is powered ultimately by some structured data. And so that is exactly the fodder that the AI machines want, that the generative AI programs and backends that a lot of our customers are starting to experiment and invest in. That's what they want. And so while this is really exciting to work at through the UI, this is just as exciting to us in terms of what can be done to automate and to be fodder to some extent for AI, but then also provide this rendering environment, right? You think about highly regulated environments like banks and pharmaceutical companies, being able to very quickly, through some language prompts, with pre-approved content and pre-built components, get to something like this, do regulatory and legal approval on this medium. We're talking about leaps and bounds of acceleration in terms of end-to-end digital production. So that's what's really exciting to us, is this moment here to create a new role, but also to extend even further and find ways to power this via automation and APIs. So I believe that is what we had next on the agenda, is to talk about automation and AI, right? It's all the same story from our end. It's all about that structured data, that ability to create connections, the ability to, most importantly, make something that can ship, right? Not just because it's production code, but because we can be connected to those delivery mechanisms, right? Through the gates and setups of Git, what you're seeing in Knapsack can, actually be something that ships to users, that's the whole point, right? As Evan said at the start, making things that ship. So with that, we have some time for questions. We showed the Figma and code. We always often get questions around, what can come from Figma here, and are there Figma initiated workflows? What actually interesting is something that we've started to POC. We have some feature flags here and there around, I mentioned that bridge, right? Now that we have this area where we've said, hey, we know what the props are in the design component, we know what the props are in the code component, we have the ability to render code with certain prop configurations. All right, we're starting to experiment with some of the abilities to say, hey, if I made this thing in Figma, or I have this component variant in Figma, and all the properties align to code, why can't I just see this thing that's in Figma in code, right? And so, we see a relatively near future where there's a lot of different inputs or prompts to this type of experience, right? It can be, sure, I can make this thing using our form and build it up in the UI. I also could have something in Figma that's made maybe entirely with the system, maybe partially with the system, and say, hey, how powerful would it be in a handoff meeting to say, all right, let's quickly look at this UI from Figma, and all the things that are already built, let's just validate how they're going to look when we ship it to end users, right? Bring that moment of realization way early before you're at the QA stage. Or obviously the language prompt idea of how can I give, prompt to a large language model and have it ultimately spit out a rendered UI using my production components and content in Knapsack. So Figma is definitely, one of those avenues that if we can, shortcut that realization, that how's it going to look to users, right? Where's the fold going to be, or any of the things that we all have probably too much trauma around, have those realizations and those cross-functional points of alignment really early before they torpedo projects. That's certainly part of this, and basing those conversations around ultimately the end user medium. So Figma will be a prompt, will be an input potentially, but one of many. Evan, do you have any questions?
Yeah, basically, like, we talk about a prototype getting really close to production, and what's that final gap look like? Because I think it's kind of interesting to compare it to the size of the gap when, something is digitally drawn out, like there's a comp or a sketch or something like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, someone's built this and they want to be able to get it to production. Like, what's that gap look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you certainly can copy and paste this code. We actually have some other webinars where we showed doing that, and hey, I made a quick React app with this. I think the reality is there's going to be some gap. You're probably not going to copy and paste this code, but I think when we look at something like this example we showed, the idea is that there's a lot less translation and transformation that would be needed compared to the code being generated by a handoff tool or a redline tool within a design canvas. And just the assurance of, I mean, that Jake, the developer advocate at Figma, on a relatively recent webinar around Code Connect was like, it's still, things are going to look different here. It's still not the end product. So we should always operate with that humility and that assumption. And so what a lot of this I just think about is let's make that gap as small as possible and remove some of the assumptions around it of like, well, I assume it's going to look like the thing that was in the PDF, right? And say, hey, it should look a lot more like this. And also, I think every engineer would be able to look at this and say, oh, I know how we'll implement that.
Yeah.
It's not this way, right? So
And I was going to say, like, I would argue that it would begin with a copy paste. I mean, I think like a average developer with a cup of coffee in an afternoon could take this and then get it into their production app, you know? I
yeah,
mean, so like basically like
yeah,
copying and pasting it in, yeah, that's the first step. But you know, you have that card with the title of consistency, then efficiency, then collaboration. Well, they're probably going to do like a loop there and then pull those titles from something that came from a database. So yeah,
yeah,
they're going to basically like delete the first two cards, keep the last one, you know. But what they've got there, you know, is like all the configuration. I mean, you take a look at the
yep,
grid where it's basically saying, hey, columns 3, gap large. You know, you see the button that basically has like the size large, type filled, you know, things like that. That's going to stick around right there. But the text that humans read, yeah, that's going to get swapped for sure, you know. Um,
yep,
so I think that basically, like, you know, there is a good starting spot with like copy pasting here, and I think most engineers want that manual tweaking phase by them before it goes into their production app because you know there's a little like each production environment's like a little bit different, right? You're going to get
yep,
your content a little bit different each of those ways, you know. um and so and then also just kind of like the nice chance for like the last bit of like human review there. But then if you think about the skills there, you have an engineer who's like, yeah, I know how to grab data from the database and pass it to React components. That, you know, they may or may not be good at like visual design, but having like, you know, hey, gap is set to large, spacing bottom set to XXX large, you know, having those already there, I think goes like a really long way. And more so than, you know, looking at a comp and seeing that there should be 40 pixels of spacing between this and that. You know, this is
right,
talking about like, hey, this is the props to actually pass to the components. So they're actually using the system.
yep. Yeah, I think of it in many ways as removing the opportunity to create those ripple effects that end up torpedoing timelines and resources and all that, right? It's really easy to look at something that was designed entirely with, Figma components that represent the coded components, but still get mired in the pixel measurements or this and, tweaking something that wasn't necessary. And the guardrails that the system represents are kind of very loose if we, in many cases, and this isn't just about Figma, it's just in, sort of the upstream design disciplines in many of these cases. So I think that's our call here is that, hey, if you represent those, you've built those parameters, you've defined them, you've implemented them. If you can work within them, it not only lets you go further faster, it just fundamentally cuts out a lot of the problem. Right? The easiest way to solve a problem like inefficiency and QA pains is to avoid the problem in the first place.
Yeah,
I think you
and I
can do
mean,
that.
like you mentioned, like basically, you know, it's about like creativity within constraints, right? I mean, it's why we design system. It's like, you know, don't pick from, 65 million colors, pick from like our 35 design tokens around colors, right? You know,
Yep.
don't pick from like every combination of HTML and CSS, pick from like our pre-created component library. So yeah,
Yep.
you do set those constraints, but the problem is they can feel constraining. I mean, kind of pun intended a little bit there, but like the point there is that like where do you run across the constraints in a way that actually like hampers what you're trying to make as opposed to trying to keep you on brand? So again, back to my point, gap analysis. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you basically you build using your components and see what blocks you. And yeah, it might be another component, but it also might just be like a new prop value. Like you're like, hey, the button has 3 sizes. We kind of need a fourth one. You know, let's go jumbo, right? Like basically, like here's the use case for it. Let's
Yep.
talk about it. Let's go ahead and like update that system because it's a constraint I ran across, you know? And if you can be able to like
Yep.
update that system, that's better than, you know, going around it, really.
Totally. It creates moments of clarity and intention for cross-functional teams, right? We know exactly the limitation we're hitting, and then we can very intentionally say, I need a jumbo button. We've decided we need, not I, we need a jumbo button, right? Or a size, or whatever it might be. And you really don't get that without sort of, like I said, being forced to work within those constraints. And so, yeah, the most interesting thing to me is just what this does workflow wise. It's not just about tools, but this, the conversations we're talking about between designers and engineers, they happen today, but we're maybe reordering some things. We're, having this, all right, I build something up quickly in code, and that informs design. And by nature, hopefully this helps engineering teams get involved even earlier in design processes like they should be, right? And so we can, also have this realization that, this isn't about hampering creativity, it's about focusing creativity on the things that we need to be creative. And the things where we don't need to be as creative because we have a tested solution, we can use that, or we can at least make a trade-off, right? A more conscious trade-off of, okay, I think we can solve this problem better, but it's going to take X amount of time and resources. Is that worth it? Right. And just really operating with that intentionality. The design phase might look different. What stakeholders are reviewing might look different, right? It might be portions of things, different patterns, and not always, whole page UIs and PDFs. But I think that's all really worth it because the opportunity is massive too, in terms of, the resources we can save and the other things we can deliver on once we start to realize the actual potential of systems. So that's what we're up to. If you didn't get a chance to get your question in here, or you're watching the recording, hi, thanks for sticking with us. We always love to hear from you. LinkedIn's a great way to get a hold of us. You can find us at hello@knapsack.cloud. Always happy to talk shop, share what we're seeing in the industry, what we're thinking about with product, and of course, get you hands-on with a detailed demo and talking with one of our account reps if it's something you want to explore for your team. Appreciate you all taking out a little bit of time of your day and hanging out with us. We'll look forward to giving you another update before too long here.